You've noticed it, haven't you? That nagging, hollow sensation every time you tap your card or check your balance in 2026. You're working harder, you're producing more, and yet the numbers in your account seem to be losing their density. It's as if the currency in your pocket is a block of ice melting in a summer sun you can't quite see. You've been told it's supply chain issues. You've been placated with technical jargon about geopolitical friction and transitory pricing. But those are just the bedtime stories the architects of the system tell you to keep you from panicking while the house burns down. The truth is much older and much darker. Since 2020, the global money supply expanded by over 30%, while actual economic output staggered. You feel it every time you walk into a grocery store. You feel it in the locked-out housing market. You aren't just living through a bad fiscal quarter. You are a ghost haunting a crime scene that was first cordoned off 5 centuries ago. The theft of your purchasing power today is an echo, a violent vibration traveling through time from a singular, jagged peak in the Bolivian Andes. It isn't a modern glitch. It's a 500-year-old murder weapon. Now, let us open the case file on the Potosí mountain and reveal the shadow behind the success. In April of 1545, a native shearer named Diego Gualpa was searching for a lost llama on the freezing slopes of a mountain known as Cerro Rico, the Rich Mountain. He built a fire to ward off the biting Andean chill, and as the embers glowed against the dark, something miraculous happened. The very ground began to weep. Streaks of pure, molten silver began to bleed from the rocks, liquefying under the intense heat of his campfire. Gualpa hadn't just found a vein of ore. He had stumbled upon the beating heartbeat of the world's future economy. At over 4,000 meters above sea level, Cerro Rico was a geological anomaly, a mountain that was, quite literally, made of silver. For the Spanish Empire, which had spent decades chasing the elusive fever dream of El Dorado through the jungles, this was the ultimate infinite money glitch. They didn't just find wealth, they found the ability to manufacture reality itself. Within years, the dusty, barren slopes of Potosí transformed into the highest city in the world, a chaotic, violent metropolis of 160,000 people. To put that in perspective, in 1600, Potosí was larger and wildly more expensive than London, Paris, or Rome. It was the Silicon Valley of the 16th century, fueled not by code, but by the heaviest, purest metal on Earth. But here is the forensic reality the history books often gloss over. The Spanish didn't see this as a resource to be carefully managed. They saw it as a debt-clearing machine. At the heart of this ruthless operation was the Quinto Real, or the Royal Fifth. Established by a royal decree in 1504, this law mandated that 20% of all precious metals mined in the New World be sent directly to the Spanish crown. Imagine a rushing river of silver. Between 1545 and 1810, this single mountain yielded over 40,000 tons of silver. That is not a mere statistic. It is a gravitational weight that reshaped the planet. It was enough silver to build a physical bridge from the peaks of the Andes all the way across the Atlantic to the docks of Seville, and still have enough left over to pave the road to Madrid. The Spanish thought they were the luckiest men to ever live. They believed they had conquered the most fundamental human constraint: scarcity. They held the keys to the world's largest ATM, and they began to spend as if the machine would never break. But money is not wealth. Money is a claim on someone else's labor. And as the galleons began to groan under the weight of millions of pieces of eight, the Spanish Empire was about to learn a lesson that you are currently relearning at the gas pump. When you flood the world with claims on labor without actually increasing the labor itself, the only thing that grows is the size of the lie. The mountain was bleeding silver, and soon the rest of the world would begin to bleed too. To understand how a mountain of silver can leave a nation completely bankrupt, you have to look past the glint of the coins and into the cold, dark machinery of the extraction. The Spanish crown didn't just find silver, they engineered a global trap. They called it the price revolution. But for the merchant in Seville or the peasant in Castile, it was a slow-motion heist. The mechanism of this disaster relied on three distinct gears. If you want to know why your savings account is worth less today than it was 5 years ago, you need to understand how these gears ground the Spanish Empire into dust. First, the chemical engine. By the 1550s, the easy silver, the pure ore near the surface, was gone. The mountain was holding onto its secrets. To get the silver out of the lower grade rock, the Spanish didn't use better tools. They used poison. In 1554, a merchant named Bartolomé de Medina perfected the patio process in Pachuca. This was the high-frequency trading of the 16th century, a technical breakthrough that permanently changed the speed of the world. By mixing crushed ore with salt, copper sulfate, and massive amounts of liquid mercury, they could wash the silver out of the dross. But mercury is a silent killer. The Spanish began shipping thousands of tons of quicksilver from the Almaden mines in Spain and the Huancavelica mines in Peru. This wasn't just mining. It was a chemical war against the earth. The beautiful silver you see in museums today was birthed in a toxic slurry that claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands. Second, the human engine. You cannot run a global silver factory on volunteers. To keep the mountain screaming, the Spanish revived an old Incan draft system called the mita. In 1573, Viceroy Francisco de Toledo formalized this into a legal death sentence. Every year, 1/7 of the adult male population from 16 surrounding provinces was forced to trek to Potosí. They weren't miners, they were fuel. They worked in shifts of 1 week on, 2 weeks off, deep in the mouth of hell, as the locals called the mine shafts. They carried 100-pound bags of ore on their backs up rickety leather ladders for 12 hours a day. The dust rotted their lungs. The mercury rotted their brains. This is the forensic fact the ledger leaves out. Behind every bar of Spanish silver was a ghost. The mountain ate men and spat out coins. By the time the dust settled, an estimated 8 million people had died in the service of Cerro Rico. Third, the economic engine. Here's the part they don't teach you. The silver didn't destroy Spain because there was too much of it. It destroyed Spain because it changed how people behaved. In Seville, a baker wakes up and doubles the price of bread, not because the wheat is scarce, but because every man walking into his shop suddenly has silver in his pocket. By noon, the price doubles again, not out of greed, but survival. Because by tomorrow, that same coin will buy less. Between 1,500 and 1,600, the amount of silver in Europe tripled. But the amount of food, clothes, and houses didn't. This is the Cantillon effect in its purest, most destructive form. Those standing closest to the money printer, the aristocrats and merchants, got rich while the inflation destroyed the peasants furthest away. The galleons were unloading 16,000 tons of silver at the docks of the Casa de Contratación, but the citizens were starving. The Spanish crown, flush with what they thought was infinite capital, began to spend aggressively. They fought wars in the Netherlands. They built the invincible Armada. They bought silk from China and spices from the East. But because they had so much silver, they stopped making things themselves. Why build a factory when you can just buy the product from a Frenchman or an Englishman with your magic silver? This was the Spanish disease, a textbook fiat contagion. The influx of silver triggered a 400% increase in prices across Europe. In Spain, the cost of living soared while domestic industry withered and died. The silver was like a high-voltage current running through a wire meant for a household lamp. It didn't power the country. It melted the circuit. The ledger entries at the Archivo General de Indias tell a story of systemic failure. While the king's vaults were overflowing, the Spanish people were starving. The silver wasn't staying in Spain. The velocity of money was staggering. It passed through the country like a ghost, flowing out to pay for foreign wars and foreign luxuries. Spain became a giant funnel, pouring the wealth of the New World directly into the pockets of their rivals in London, Amsterdam, and Beijing. By the late 16th century, the pieces of 8 minted in Potosí had become the world's first truly global currency. It was the US dollar of its day, used from the markets of Manila to the banks of Florence. But the people who owned the mountain, the ones who held the most silver, were the ones most ruined by it. They had cornered the market on a commodity that was destroying their own purchasing power every single day. They thought they were the masters of the mountain. In reality, they were just the first victims of the very inflation they had unleashed. They were drowning in silver, and the more they struggled, the deeper they sank. The mountain didn't move, but the world changed around it. By the end of the 16th century, the Spanish crown was trapped in a paradox that would baffle modern economists if they weren't so busy repeating it. Philip II wasn't just a king. He was the first man to run a global empire on margin. He sat on a throne built of Andean silver, yet he ran a permanent structural deficit. He spent silver that hadn't even left the mountain yet. He borrowed against ships that hadn't crossed the Atlantic. He wasn't reacting to reality. He was pricing in a future that hadn't happened. He was a 16th century hedge fund manager wearing a crown. And in 1557, sitting in the freezing halls of the El Escorial Palace, surrounded by gold and silver, he did the unthinkable. He declared the Spanish Empire bankrupt. It wasn't a fluke. He did it again in 1575, and again in 1596. His successor followed suit in 1607. Think about that. The man who owned the richest mountain in the history of the human race, the man who controlled the world's reserve currency, couldn't pay his bills. The forensic reason was simple. The silver had created a massive moral hazard. Because the crown felt rich, they overextended. They used forward collateral to pay for current wars, essentially inventing the concept of global deficit spending. When the silver fleets were delayed by storms or intercepted by English privateers, the entire house of cards collapsed. To cover the gap, the crown didn't stop spending. They started cheating. They triggered a vicious debasement spiral. They began mixing the pure silver with cheap copper to create the vellon coins. It was the 16th century equivalent of a money printer goes brr meme. Immediately, Gresham's law took hold. Bad money drives out good. Citizens hoarded the pure silver and spent the debased copper, collapsing trust in the system entirely. By 1650, the greatest empire on earth was a hollowed-out shell, its people impoverished by the very treasure that was supposed to save them. This brings us to the bill you are paying today, in 2026. The story of Potosí isn't a dusty chapter of colonial history. It is the blueprint for the modern world. We have replaced the rich mountain with the digital printing press of central banks. We no longer need mercury and salt to create currency. We only need a keyboard and confidence. But the laws of the universe haven't changed. Whether it's 16th century silver or 21st century fiat, when you flood the system with an asset inflation that isn't backed by an increase in actual human value, you aren't creating wealth. You are creating a tax on time. You are stealing the weight from the coins in your neighbor's pocket to pay for your own illusions. The mountain is still there, by the way. It stands 400 meters shorter than it did in 1545, literally shrinking from 5 centuries of extraction. It is a jagged, honeycombed monument to human greed, a reminder that when we try to cheat the ledger eventually cheats us back. So let's make this uncomfortable. If printing money destroys empires, then what exactly do you call what we've been doing since 2020? Stabilization? Or just a more sophisticated version of the same lie? The Spanish Empire collapsed because they believed printing pieces of 8 to fund endless wars was the same thing as building actual industry. Look at the $3-4+ trillion US national debt in 2026. Are we just 16th century Spain with better Wi-Fi? Let me know in the comments if you think the modern Federal Reserve is any different than King Philip's alchemists. Because in the ledger of history, every debt must eventually be paid.